What secrets lie in the battles of beings no taller than your thumb? And could their miniature world hold a mirror to our greatest vanities? Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight's tale is The Pygmies by Nathaniel Hawthorne, a classic tale reimagined and retold for the modern age.
Long ago, in a world brimming with wonders, there lived a giant named Antaeus, an enormous being born of the very earth itself. Far below him, in the vast stretches of Africa, dwelt millions of tiny earth-born folk known as pygmies. Though the giant towered into the skies and the pygmies barely rose a few inches, they shared a bond deeper than size, a bond of kinship, for both were children of the same ancient mother, the nurturing, mysterious earth. The pygmies lived in secret, their diminutive cities hidden behind towering deserts and jagged mountains. To the outside world they were invisible. Glimpses of them came only once in a century, if that. Antaeus, however, loomed so vast that any traveler might spot him, though it was always wiser to stay out of his sight. Among the pygmies, someone reaching 6 or 8 inches was considered a giant. Imagine, if you will, their little streets, narrow pathways just a few feet wide, paved with tiny pebbles, lined with houses no larger than a squirrel's cage. In the heart of one such city stood the king's palace, a marvel the size of a doll's playhouse, surrounded by a square that could barely fit under a single hearthrug. Their grand temple or cathedral reached as high as a bureau and was revered as a masterpiece of awe and beauty. None of these structures were made of stone or timber. Instead, pygmy craftsmen wove them together like intricate birds' nests, using straw, feathers, fragments of eggshell, and other tiny treasures bound with stiff clay in place of mortar. When the sun baked them dry, they became snug, durable homes, a perfect fit for beings so small yet so ingenious. Even the surrounding fields were thoughtfully arranged, with the largest stretching only as far as a generous flower bed might in our world, a miniature landscape meticulously tended, bursting with life and color. In their tiny fields, the pygmies grew wheat and other grains, plants that, when full grown, towered over them like mighty oaks and pines overshadow us in a forest. Harvest was no small task. Armed with miniature axes, the little farmers hacked through the towering stalks, just as a lumberjack clears a dense forest. And woe to any pygmy caught beneath a heavy bending stalk. The unlucky soul could be flattened, bruised, or at least have a headache that felt as big as the world itself. And consider the children. Tiny infants no bigger than a thimble, who might curl up snugly in a shoe, crawl through an old glove, and play hide-and-seek among its thumb and fingers. Entire families could vanish into these everyday objects, a world within our world. Above all this lived their colossal brother, the giant Antaeus. If the pygmies were small, he was beyond imagination. So enormous was he that he carried a pine tree 8 feet wide at its base as a walking stick. From a pygmy's vantage point, spotting the top of his head required keen eyesight and sometimes a telescope. On misty mornings, only his long, striding legs could be glimpsed, the upper half of his body lost in the clouds. But on a bright, clear noon, Antaeus revealed himself in all his glory, a walking mountain of a man, smiling down at his tiny kin with a single enormous eye, the size of a cartwheel, centered on his forehead, winking warmly at the nation below. The pygmies adored him. Throughout the day, dozens of tiny voices would rise up, echoing through the valleys. "Hello, brother Antaeus! How are you, my good fellow?" And from his lofty perch came a response like rolling thunder. "Pretty well, brother pygmy, I thank you." Even though his voice was so immense it could have toppled the sturdiest temple, it traveled safely from above, carrying warmth, laughter, and a sense of kinship across the great divide of size and world. It was a fortunate thing indeed that Antaeus was a friend to the Pygmies, for even the tiniest finger of his carried more strength than 10 million Pygmies combined. Had he been as ill-tempered toward them as he sometimes was with the rest of the world, a single careless step could have flattened their largest city, leaving the inhabitants scattered like grains of sand. A puff of his breath could have torn roofs from 100 homes, sending thousands of little folk spinning through the air. One careless stump and a multitude might vanish beneath his foot, only to rise again to a scene of pitiful ruin. But the giant, child of Mother Earth as the Pygmies were, held them close in his heart. He loved them with a tenderness as immense as his body, and they, in turn, loved him with every ounce of their tiny beating hearts. Antaeus was always ready to lend his enormous strength in subtle, life-saving ways. When the windmills needed a breeze, he breathed life into their sails. When the sun scorched the land, he would cast his vast shadow across the kingdom, cooling every field and alley. Yet in all things, he was careful to give the Pygmies freedom, leaving them to govern their own small but vibrant world, a lesson that great beings often forget when dealing with the small. And so it went generation after generation. The Pygmies' histories, their songs, and their traditions all spoke of the giant who had always been their protector, their friend. Even the oldest white-bearded Pygmy could not recall a time that Antaeus had not been a towering presence of kindness in their lives. There was, however, one incident memorialized on a tiny obelisk just 3 feet tall, marking a peculiar catastrophe. During a grand military review, Antaeus had accidentally sat upon roughly 5,000 assembled Pygmies. A calamity, yes, but in true brotherly fashion, it was a mistake, and the giant mourned it as deeply as if the entire world had been harmed. But this was one of those rare accidents for which no one could be blamed. The Pygmies never held a grudge. They simply asked their enormous friend to check the ground carefully before taking his next seat. Picture it, Antaeus standing tall among the tiny folk like the spire of the grandest cathedral ever built, while the Pygmies scurried about at his feet like a colony of ants. Despite the immense difference in size, there was genuine affection and understanding between them, and truth be told, it often seemed the giant needed the Pygmies far more than they needed him. Without these miniature neighbors, companions, and playful friends, Antaeus would have been utterly alone. No other creature matched his size. No being had ever spoken to him face to face, their voices thunderous and echoing through the clouds. Alone among the skies for centuries, he might have remained so forever. Even if another giant had existed, he likely would have seen the world as too small for both, and a clash of titans would have been inevitable. But with the Pygmies, he was gentle, playful, and full of humor, a merry-hearted old giant who could wash his enormous face in the mist of a passing cloud without a care in the world. The Pygmies, naturally proud of their own cleverness, often took a playful, almost patronizing stance toward their towering friend. Poor creature, how lonely he must be, all by himself. Surely it is our duty to spend a little of our precious time cheering him up. He is no brighter than we are, and for that reason he needs our care. We must look after the old fellow's happiness. After all, if Mother Earth had not been kind to us, any of us might have been giants instead. And so, during every festival and holiday, the Pygmies found endless amusement in playing with Antaeus, laughing and running around his enormous feet, while he delighted in every tiny game, every mischievous trick, and every cheerful squeak of their voices. Antaeus often stretched himself out on the ground, lying so still that he seemed like a long, gentle ridge of a hill. For a short-legged pygmy, it would take a good hour's walk to travel from his enormous head to the tip of his toes. With a grin, he would lay one massive hand flat on the grass and invite the tallest among them to climb aboard, straddling from finger to finger like a daring acrobat. The pygmies were fearless. They would crawl into the folds of his garments, march up to his head, and peek boldly into the cavernous depths of his mouth, laughing every time Antaeus pretended to snap his jaws, as if he might swallow 50 of them in one gulp. Children swung through his hair, slid down his beard, and performed stunts that would have made even the bravest acrobat dizzy. One of their favorite games was racing across the broad curve of his forehead, circling the enormous cartwheel-sized eye to see who could complete the loop first. Others balanced along the bridge of his nose before leaping onto his upper lip, shrieking with delight all the while. Truth be told, the pygmies could be as mischievous and bothersome as a swarm of ants, or even mosquitoes. They loved to poke his skin with tiny swords and lances, testing its thickness and resilience, but Antaeus took it all in stride. On rare occasions, if he were sleepy or irritated, he would mutter a grumbling word or two, like distant thunder rolling across the land, asking them to stop their antics. More often, however, he watched them with amusement, letting their tiny, gleeful chaos stir his immense, ponderous mind. And when the mirth finally reached its peak, the giant would unleash a roar of laughter so vast and thunderous that the entire nation of pygmies had to clutch their ears or risk being deafened by the sheer magnitude of his joy. "Ho, ho, ho, ho!" thundered Antaeus, shaking his immense rolling shoulders. "What a curious thing it is to be so tiny! If I weren't Antaeus, I think I would like to be a pygmy, just for the fun of it." The pygmies had only one true worry in their tiny lives: the cranes. Ever since memory stretched back to the earliest days of Antaeus, these birds had been their relentless foes. Battles erupted from time to time, sometimes ending in victory for the brave little pygmies, and sometimes for the towering feathered predators. Historians claimed that the pygmies rode into battle atop goats or rams, but such beasts must have been far too large for creatures barely a few inches tall. More likely, they rode squirrelback, rabbitback, ratback, or even hedgehogback, the prickly quills of the latter striking terror into their winged enemies. Whatever mounts they chose, they made a formidable sight. Tiny warriors brandishing swords, spears, bows, and arrows, trumpets blaring, war cries piercing the air, every pygmy determined to fight with courage and pride, even if the only witness to their valor was Antaeus, his enormous single eye fixed upon the battlefield. When the armies collided, the cranes swept forward, wings flapping like storm clouds, necks stretched in deadly arcs, sometimes snatching a pygmy mid-air and swallowing him whole. It was a terrifying sight, the little heroes kicking, wriggling, and vanishing into the long, curved beaks of the enemy. Yet, in the pygmies' hearts, glory outweighed fear. Even the grim fate of being trapped in a crane's gizzard could not diminish their courage. And if the battle ever seemed to turn against them, Antaeus would stop laughing mid-stride, his great legs carrying him across the land in mile-long bounds. He would raise his mighty club high and roar at the cranes with all the force of a thunderstorm. At once, the birds would scatter, quacking and flapping in disarray, retreating as fast as their wings could carry them, leaving the pygmies victorious once more.
After the battle, the pygmy army would march home in triumph, proudly claiming the victory as the result of their own courage and the brilliant strategy of whichever captain happened to lead them. For days afterward, the air would buzz with celebration. Grand processions wound through the tiny streets, public feasts overflowed with delicacies, Brilliant illuminations sparkled under the sun, and intricate wax figures of the heroic officers, perfectly life-sized for pygmies, stood on display, admired by every citizen. In this miniature warfare, even the smallest feat could earn immense honor. To pluck a single crane's tail feather was considered a triumph worthy of a medal, or, in some cases, the ultimate reward. One daring pygmy was once made chief ruler of the nation solely for returning home with such a feather. Thus, you can see the gallantry of these little people and how for countless generations they had lived happily alongside their enormous friend Antaeus. But the most astonishing battle of all, the one that would truly shake their tiny world, was yet to come. One sunlit afternoon, Antaeus was stretched out across the land, resting among his little companions. His massive pine tree walking stick lay beside him like a fallen trunk. His head rested in one corner of the kingdom, his feet extended across another, and he made himself as comfortable as one could when sprawled across an entire realm. Meanwhile, the pygmies scrambled over his enormous body, peeking into his cavernous mouth, crawling through his hair and playing as though he were the grandest playground imaginable. At times, the giant drifted into a brief nap, snoring like a roaring whirlwind. During one such slumber, a daring pygmy climbed onto his shoulder, climbing as if onto the peak of a great hill. From that lofty perch, he scanned the distant horizon, and his eyes widened in astonishment. At first, he thought he saw a mountain sprouting suddenly from the earth, but then the mountain moved. Closer and closer it came, and the tiny scout realized it was not a mountain at all, but a human shape, enormous compared to pygmies, colossal by any ordinary standard, though still smaller than Antaeus himself. Yet even at a distance, the figure's size dwarfed anything the pygmies had ever known, and a hush of wonder and trepidation fell over the little kingdom. Once the pygmy was certain his eyes had not deceived him, he sprinted as fast as his tiny legs could carry him to Antaeus's enormous ear. Stretching over its cavernous opening, he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Halloo, brother Antaeus! Get up this instant! Take your pine tree walking stick in hand! Another giant is coming, and he means to have a tussle with you!" "Puh, puh!" grumbled Antaeus, still half asleep, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "None of your nonsense, little one. Can't you see I'm resting? There's not a giant on earth for whom I'd bother to rise." But the pygmy's eyes were sharp, and now the stranger was unmistakably approaching the sprawling form of Antaeus. At first he had appeared like a distant blue mountain, but step by step he transformed into an immense, towering figure of a man. His golden helmet gleamed in the sunlight, polished armor flashed along his chest, a sword hung at his side, and over his back draped the pelt of a mighty lion. On his right shoulder rested a club so massive it seemed even heavier than Antaeus's legendary pine tree walking stick. By now, the entire pygmy nation had caught sight of the newcomer. 1,000,000 tiny voices erupted in unison, producing a squeak that, though miniature to human ears, was deafening in their little world. "Get up, Antaeus! Steer yourself, you lazy old giant! Another giant is coming, just as strong as you, to challenge you." "Nonsense, nonsense," growled the sleepy Antaeus. "I will finish my nap, come who may." The stranger drew nearer still. The pygmies could now see clearly that although he was slightly shorter than their colossal brother, his shoulders were broader than anything they had ever seen, vast and powerful, as if they had once held up the sky itself. The pygmies, 10 times as vivacious and impatient as their slow-moving brother, could not endure his leisurely pace. Determined to rouse him, they shouted and danced about, poking and prodding him with their tiny swords, trying to stir the mighty Antaeus from his slumber before the stranger arrived. "Get up! Get up! Get up!" the pygmies shouted, voices squeaking in unison. "Rise, lazy bones! The stranger's club is larger than yours, his shoulders broader, and we think him stronger of the two." Antaeus could not tolerate such an insult. No mortal, he thought, could be half as mighty as himself.
Their words pricked him deeper than any sword. With a slow, sulky yawn several yards wide, he rubbed his enormous eyes, turned his massive head in the direction the pygmies were pointing, and finally, at last, set eyes on the stranger. The effect was immediate. With a thunderous leap, Antaeus sprang to his feet, seized his pine tree walking stick, and strode toward the newcomer with mile-long strides, brandishing the massive stick so it whistled through the air like a crashing storm. "Who are you?" he bellowed, his voice rolling across the land. "And what brings you into my dominions?" There is one extraordinary thing about Antaeus that I have not mentioned until now, lest it overwhelm you with wonders. Whenever this formidable giant touched the earth, be it with hand, foot, or any other part of his colossal body, he grew stronger than ever before. The earth, his mother, doted on him as one of her mightiest children, and this was her secret method of keeping him at full vigor. Some say that with every touch he became 10 times as strong. Others claim only twice as strong. But imagine it. A single stroll of 10 miles, with strides 100 yards long, would leave him immensely mightier than when he started. And if he lay down for a moment's rest, rising instantly, he would be as powerful as 10 giants like his former self. The stage was set. The pygmies cheered, the stranger drew near, and Antaeus, now fully awake and filled with unstoppable strength, prepared to confront a foe worthy of his legendary might. It was fortunate for the world that Antaeus was slow by nature and preferred comfort over exertion. Had he bounced about with the restless energy of the pygmies, touching the earth at every step, he might long ago have grown powerful enough to tear the sky down upon humanity itself. Giants like Antaeus were much like mountains, immense, immovable, and deeply uninterested in unnecessary motion. Any other mortal man, save the one now standing before him, would have been paralyzed with fear at Antaeus's savage glare and thunderous voice. But the stranger showed no sign of alarm. Calmly, almost lazily, he lifted his massive club and weighed it in his hand, studying Antaeus from head to toe, not with awe, but with familiarity. It was the look of someone who had faced giants before and found them wanting. Had Antaeus been no larger than a pygmy, the stranger could not have seemed less intimidated.
"Who are you, I say?" Antaeus roared again. "What is your name? Why do you come here? Speak, you vagabond, or I'll test the thickness of your skull with my walking stick." "You are a most ill-mannered giant," the stranger replied coolly, "and before we part, I may need to teach you a lesson in courtesy. As for my name, it is Hercules. I pass through this land because it lies along my road to the garden of the Hesperides. I am bound to retrieve 3 golden apples for King Eurystheus." At the name, Antaeus's expression darkened. He had heard of Hercules, heard too much. Tales of impossible strength, of monsters defeated, of labors no other man could survive. And he hated the hero instantly. "Wretch!" Antaeus bellowed, "you shall go no farther, and neither shall you return the way you came." Hercules tilted his head slightly, unimpressed. "And how," he asked calmly, "do you propose to stop me from going wherever I please?" "By striking you with this pine tree," roared Antaeus, twisting his grimacing face into what might have been the ugliest expression ever seen in Africa. "I am 50 times stronger than you, and now with a single stomp upon the earth, I am 500 times stronger. I am ashamed to kill so puny a creature as you. No, better that you become my slave, and that you serve my brethren, the pygmies. Throw down your club and weapons, and that lion's skin, ha! I will fashion it into gloves for myself." "Come and take it from my shoulders, then," replied Hercules calmly, hefting his club as if he were preparing to lift a pebble. With a roar that shook the very air, Antaeus surged forward, each step amplifying his might tenfold.
He swung his massive pine tree stick with all the force of a falling mountain. Hercules met the blow with his own club, catching it with perfect precision. Then, with the skill honed from countless battles, he returned a thunderous strike across Antaeus's brow. The lumbering giant tumbled flat to the ground, a colossal mass of rolling earth and thunderous limbs. The Pygmies, who had never imagined anyone could match their beloved Antaeus, froze in astonishment and fear. But Antaeus was not finished. With a bound that shook the soil like an earthquake, he sprang to his feet, now tenfold stronger. His face twisted in a fury that would chill the heart of any mortal. He swung again at Hercules, but blind with wrath, he missed. His blow smashed into the very earth itself, sending vibrations across the land. The pine tree lodged so deep into the ground that he could not pull it free before Hercules struck again, clubs smashing across Antaeus's shoulders with a deafening thwack. The roar that erupted from the giant was unlike any sound ever known, part thunder, part avalanche, part the groaning of the earth itself. It echoed over mountains and valleys, carrying across deserts so vast that even distant lands might have trembled at the sound. Meanwhile, the Pygmies' capital city, tiny and delicate in comparison, was shattered by the shockwave alone. Roofs rattled, streets quivered, and every inhabitant shrieked in terror. 3,000,000 little throats cried out together, convinced, no doubt, that their own voices were magnifying Antaeus's roar tenfold. The stage was set for a duel that would shake both earth and sky, and the tiniest spectators, the Pygmies, watched in awe, fear, and utter amazement.
Meanwhile, Antaeus had scrambled to his feet once more, wrenching his pine tree walking stick free from the earth. His fury blazed hotter than ever, and with strength magnified beyond imagining, he charged at Hercules, swinging another colossal blow. "This time, rascal," he thundered, "you shall not escape me." But Hercules, calm and measured, deflected the strike with his club. The giant pine tree shattered into 1,000 splinters, hurling shards through the air, some striking the Pygmies with shocking force. Before Antaeus could recover, Hercules struck again, sending the lumbering giant rolling heels over head. Yet every fall only seemed to fuel Antaeus's monstrous strength further. Rage consumed him completely. His single, immense eye burned like a red-hot furnace. Weapons gone, he clenched his fists, each one larger than a hogshead, and slammed them together with a force that made the earth quake. He danced up and down in a frenzy, arms flailing, as though he meant not merely to crush Hercules, but to tear the entire world asunder. "Come on," he bellowed. "Let me land but one blow on your ear, and you'll never suffer a headache again." Hercules, though strong enough to hold up the heavens themselves, realized that he could not hope to win by striking alone. Every knockdown only allowed Antaeus to draw fresh power from the earth, his mother. So he threw down his club, battle-scarred from countless wars, and squared himself with naked arms, ready to meet the giant in a contest of sheer strength. "Step forward," Hercules called, voice steady and unshaken. "Since I have broken your pine tree, let us see which of us is the better man at wrestling." "Aha! Then we shall see," roared Antaeus, a grin of fury splitting his enormous face. "Villain, I will fling you where you shall never rise again." With that, Antaeus sprang forward, hopping and capering in a storm of heat and rage. Each thundering stride brought him new vigor, each bounce feeding the fire of his passion. The earth trembled beneath him, and the little Pygmies watched from the edges of the battlefield, hearts in their mouths, unable to tear their eyes from the titanic duel unfolding before them. But Hercules, clever and experienced, was far wiser than this lumbering, earth-born giant.
He had already devised a way to defeat Antaeus, this monstrous Mother Earth-touched brute, and he executed it with calm precision. As the furious giant charged, Hercules waited for the perfect moment. With lightning speed, he seized Antaeus around the massive waist, lifting him high into the air, holding him aloft as if he were a mere child. Picture it, my dear listeners, the colossal giant dangling above the earth, face down, legs flailing, body wriggling wildly, as though he were a giant infant being dangled toward the ceiling. The sight must have been both terrifying and mesmerizing, even for the smallest pygmy watching from below. Then came the truly extraordinary part. The instant Antaeus's feet left the ground, he began to weaken. His superhuman strength he drew from Mother Earth vanished, his furious kicks lost power, and his mighty roar dwindled to a mere grumble. Antaeus had guessed the secret. The giant's enormous might depended entirely on touching the earth. Without the ground beneath him, his overgrown strength and even the very breath of life faded swiftly.
Hercules, understanding this, did not strike. He simply held Antaeus aloft, letting gravity and absence of contact with the earth sap the giant's power. In that lofty space, the fearsome, earth-born monster was suddenly manageable, and in that moment, pity touched Hercules, for despite Antaeus's uncivil treatment of visitors, the giant was truly a child of the earth, and now helpless. When the time came, Hercules gave Antaeus's vast body a tremendous toss. The giant sailed through the air for a full mile, landing with a resounding crash. He lay motionless, no more alive than a sand hill, and Mother Earth herself could do nothing. It is said that even to this day, the ponderous bones of Antaeus may still rest there, mistaken by travelers for those of an unusually gigantic elephant, a silent testament to a giant who was mighty only on the soil of his mother, and bested by a hero who knew his secret. Oh, the lamentations of the poor little pygmies! Their tiny voices rose in an ear-splitting wail at the sight of their enormous brother treated so brutally. They squeaked and shrieked, flitted and scattered in panic, hearts full of despair. But Hercules, deep in thought from the fierce struggle, seemed oblivious. Perhaps he mistook their cries for the frightened twittering of birds startled from their nests by the thunderous clash between him and Antaeus. In truth, he had never even noticed the existence of these tiny people. His mind had been consumed entirely by the giant. Finally, wearied from his battle, Hercules laid out his lion's skin on the ground, stretched himself upon it, and fell into a deep, untroubled sleep. The pygmies, seeing their adversary now at rest, exchanged knowing glances. A silent signal passed among them, and they crept together into a dense crowd, spreading over a space nearly 30 feet wide. One of their most eloquent orators, a brave warrior whose tongue was far sharper than his sword, climbed atop a toadstool, and with all the authority he could muster, addressed the assembly. "Tall pygmies, mighty little men," he began, voice ringing like a clarion across the tiny square. "We have witnessed a public calamity, an outrage that none of us could have imagined. Yonder lies Antaeus, our great friend and brother, felled within our lands by a miscreant who struck him when he was off guard. He has fought in a manner that no man, no giant, nor even pygmy has ever seen before. And to add insult to injury, that same miscreant now rests, as if nothing in the world could threaten him, completely indifferent to the fury we, his victim's kin, might bring upon him." The pygmy shuddered and gasped, little fists clenched in indignation, plotting silently what to do next. Though small in stature, their courage and cleverness were enormous, and even in the shadow of such titanic beings, their spirits remained unbowed. "My people," the speaker cried, his chest heaving with passion, "we must ask ourselves how history will judge us if we allow these insults to pass unanswered. What face shall we show the world if we bow our heads and accept such disgrace?
What verdict will impartial time deliver upon our nation if we let this outrage fade without retribution? A murmur rippled through the crowd. Antaeus was not merely a giant, the orator continued, voice trembling. He was our brother, born of the same sacred mother who gave us our strength of limb and our courage of heart. Through him we felt proud of our bloodline. He stood beside us as a loyal ally and fell not only defending himself, but defending our shared rights, our shared land, our shared dignity. The Pygmies listened, eyes glistening. For generations beyond counting, we lived beside him in peace. We rested in the shade of his towering form. Our children laughed as they played among the wild tangles of his hair. His footsteps passed among our homes again and again, careful, familiar, never once crushing even the smallest of our toes. And now look upon him, our dear brother, our gentle friend, our steadfast protector, our noble ally. Antaeus, once mighty, once living, now lies silent, motionless, powerless, reduced to nothing more than a vast mound of lifeless earth. He paused, wiping his eyes. "Forgive these tears," he said softly, "yet I see them shining in your eyes as well. And if we were to flood the world with our grief, could the world truly condemn us?" His tone hardened. "But grief alone is not enough." A hush fell. "Shall we allow this treacherous stranger to rise, walk away, and boast of his victory among distant lands? Shall he carry his triumph across the earth while our brother's bones lie unavenged? Or shall we demand justice here on this very soil by forcing him to leave his own remains beside Antaeus's?" Gasps swept the assembly. "Let one skeleton stand forever as a monument to our sorrow, and let the other endure as a warning, an eternal lesson carved into history itself, so that all peoples may know the cost of defying Pygmy vengeance." He lifted his tiny arms high. "That is the question before us, and I trust your answer will honor our ancestors, strengthen our legacy, and prove that the courage we displayed in our ancient wars, yes, even against the cranes, still burns fiercely within us today." The crowd erupted, their small voices united, their resolve suddenly enormous. The speech could go no further. A sudden wave of uncontrollable excitement exploded through the crowd. Every single pygmy shouted at once, voices shrill but fierce, declaring that the honor of their nation must be defended, whatever the cost. The orator raised his hands. Slowly, the noise fell away. Bowing his head with solemn pride, he delivered his final words. "There is only one question left before us. Shall we wage this war as one people, an entire nation rising together against a common foe? Or shall we choose a single champion, a warrior proven in former battles, to challenge the slayer of our brother Antaeus in honorable combat?" A pause. "And if the task falls to one alone, then, though I know there may be men among you of greater height, I place myself forward for that glorious duty." A ripple of awe passed through the assembly. "Believe me, my countrymen," he cried, voice ringing clear, "whether I return victorious or fall upon this soil, the honor of our great nation shall not diminish in my hands. The fame entrusted to us by our heroic ancestors will not be stained while I yet draw breath." He seized his weapon. "Never, so long as I can wield this blade," he thundered. "Never shall I yield, not even if the same blood-stained hand that struck down Antaeus casts me upon the earth I gladly give my life to defend." With that, the valiant pygmy drew his sword, fearsome to behold, its shining length rivaling that of a penknife, and flung its scabbard spinning high above the crowd. The response was deafening. Cheers erupted, tiny hands clapped wildly, shouts of devotion and patriotic fervor rose into the air, and might have gone on far longer had they not been abruptly drowned out by a deep, thunderous sound. A snore. The ground itself seemed to vibrate as Hercules, utterly unaware of the storm gathering around him, slept on in peaceful exhaustion. In the end, the decision was unanimous. The entire nation of Pygmies would take part in the destruction of Hercules, not because they doubted that a single champion could strike him down, but because he was a public enemy, and every citizen wished to claim a share in the glory of his defeat. A final debate arose. Some argued that national honor required a formal challenge, that a herald be sent with a trumpet to stand beside the sleeping hero, blast a defiant note directly into his ear, and proclaim the declaration of war according to ancient custom. And so, while Hercules slept on, the smallest nation on earth prepared itself for the boldest act of vengeance it had ever imagined. Yet not all among the Pygmies were swept away by youthful fury. 2 or 3 elders, ancient, sharp-eyed, and deeply practiced in the grim arithmetic of statecraft, rose to speak. In measured tones, they argued that war already existed, and that no law, written or unwritten, forbade the striking of an enemy while he lay unguarded. Better to surprise him than to awaken him. For if Hercules were allowed to rise to his feet, he might do dreadful harm before they could bring him low again. His club, so they reminded the council, was no ordinary weapon. It had crashed upon the skull of Antaeus like a bolt from the heavens. Wisdom, therefore, demanded speed, not ceremony. Honor could wait, survival could not. So the Pygmies cast aside all punctilious scruples and resolved to strike at once. Every fighting man in the nation armed himself and advanced boldly toward the sleeping giant, who lay stretched upon the ground, breathing deeply, utterly unaware of the danger gathering at his side.
At the forefront marched 20,000 archers, bows drawn tight, arrows trembling upon their strings. Behind them came an equal number of soldiers ordered to scale the giant himself, some carrying spades, intending to destroy his eyes, others burdened with hay, straw, and heaps of refuse meant to be crammed into his mouth and nostrils so that he might be suffocated in his sleep. But this plan collapsed the moment it was attempted. For the breath of Hercules thundered from his nostrils like a raging storm. Each exhalation roared forth as a violent gust, sweeping the attackers away as easily as dust before a hurricane. The Pygmies were flung back again and again, tumbling helplessly across the ground. It was clear this method would not serve. Another council was hastily convened. After grave discussion, a new strategy was declared. The troops were ordered to gather sticks, straw, dry weeds, and every scrap of combustible material they could find. Thousands rushed to the task, dragging armfuls of fuel toward the sleeping hero. Piece by piece, they piled it high around his head, bushels upon bushels, until a towering mound rose beside his face. So great was the heap that Pygmies standing atop it found themselves level with the giant's features. Meanwhile, the archers took their positions just within bow range, arrows poised, awaiting the slightest movement. At the first stir of Hercules, at the smallest twitch of muscle, they were to loose their shafts. And thus, while the greatest hero of the age slept on, the smallest nation on earth prepared to burn him alive.
With everything set, a torch was applied to the towering heap of dry wood and straw. The flames erupted immediately, crackling with an almost malicious glee. Soon the fire grew ferocious, a scorching inferno, enough heat to roast the great Hercules should he choose to lie still long enough. Though small, a pygmy has all the tools to set the world ablaze, just as a giant might in a different way. They were confident that this fiery scheme would work, if only their massive adversary could remain asleep long enough to endure the flames. But Hercules was not one to lie quietly for long. The moment the heat hit, his body jolted. He shot up from the ground like a lion awakening from a nightmare, his hair blazing red with fire. "What in the name of Zeus is this?" he bellowed, utterly disoriented, blinking through the smoke as though he expected to find another giant. Before he could comprehend the situation, the Pygmies, all 20,000 of them, let loose a volley of arrows. The bowstrings twanged with precision, and hundreds of tiny missiles sliced through the air like a swarm of angry bees. However, their efforts, though valiant, were in vain. The skin of Hercules was as thick and impervious as the walls of a fortress, and barely a half-dozen of the arrows made it through, their heads bouncing harmlessly off his flesh. "Villain!" they shrieked in unison, their voices rising in a frantic chorus. "We declare bloody war on you, and you shall perish here!" Still groggy from sleep, Hercules rubbed his head and looked around in confusion. The shrill cries of the Pygmies echoed in his ears, but he couldn't spot a single soul, not even the slightest hint of their presence. Frustrated, and still only half awake, he squinted at the ground beneath him. That's when he saw it, an army of Pygmies swarming around his feet like 1,000 ants. They were so small they blended into the grass, only their frantic movements giving them away. He crouched down and with a casual flick of his fingers picked up the nearest pygmy, holding him between his thumb and forefinger as if he were a speck of dust. Hercules raised him to eye level, studying him with mild curiosity. "Well now, little one," he said, utterly bemused, "what in the world are you?" "I am your enemy," came the shrill reply, as the tiny pygmy straightened with all the might his small body could muster. "You have slain Antaeus, our brother by Mother Earth and the loyal protector of our people. Now we will avenge him. And as for me, I challenge you to single combat, here and now, on equal ground." Hercules, still holding the tiny pygmy in his hand, couldn't contain himself. The sight of the brave little warrior standing so boldly and speaking such grandiose words completely overwhelmed him. With a roar of laughter that shook the very air, he almost lost his grip on the tiny figure, who clung desperately to the tips of his fingers. "By the gods!" Hercules exclaimed, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "I thought I'd seen everything. Hydras with 9 heads, stags with golden horns, 6-legged men, 3-headed dogs, and even giants with furnaces in their bellies. But here, right in the palm of my hand, is a spectacle that outshines them all. Your body, my little friend, is no bigger than an ordinary man's finger. Tell me, how big is your soul?" "As big as yours," the pygmy replied, his voice unwavering. Hercules, now moved by the pygmy's boldness and courage, lowered his hand and gazed at the miniature figure with admiration. "Well then," Hercules said with a respectful nod, "I must admit your heart matches the might of any giant I've ever known. Such bravery deserves respect." He lowered himself to one knee, making a grand gesture toward the pygmy nation as they watched with wide eyes. "I would never harm such heroes as you. Your courage is immense, and your spirits are mightier than I ever thought possible in such small frames." The mighty hero paused, a smirk curling on his lips as he made his decision. "As a token of my respect, I ask for peace. I shall leave your kingdom with all the honor of a hero who has met his match. I will take 5 giant strides, and by the 6th I'll be gone, careful not to trample on your brave souls. Goodbye, brave warriors. Ha ha! For once, even Hercules must admit he's been outdone." As Hercules turned to leave, the Pygmies stood in awe. They had faced the mighty Hercules in battle, only to scare him away with their courage. Some say that Hercules, impressed by their bravery, gathered up the entire race of Pygmies in his lion's skin and brought them back to Greece, where they entertained the children of King Eurystheus. But this, the storytellers agree, is a tall tale. What's more likely is that Hercules left them where they belonged, in their own land, free to continue their small but extraordinary lives. Perhaps even to this day, their descendants still live there, building their tiny houses, growing their little crops, spanking their little children, and waging their endless war against the cranes. And in their ancient stories, they may still tell of how long ago they avenged the death of their mighty brother Antaeus, not with swords or arrows, but with the most powerful weapon of all, courage.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.